Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joseph Attic, Executive Chairman of ID for Africa, and I would like to welcome you to our 13th LiveCast episode. Whether you are a returning attendee or someone who is experiencing our LiveCasts for the first time, we're pleased to have you with us. Today, we focus on the important topic of infant identification and the legal identity agenda. But before we embark on this journey, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items. First, I want to remind you that the next LiveCast episode will be a very special one on March 10th. We will be celebrating International Women's Day, which happens to be earlier that week, with a special session on gender matters in identity systems. This will be a high-profile panel of thought leaders and practitioners, with a series of short presentations first, followed by a panel of women representing African authorities who will engage with me on policy surrounding gender challenges in identity systems. So come celebrate with us, be part of the experience, listen to what these illustrious women have to say on the topic, give a shout out and voice your solidarity through the chat and share your perspectives through the Community Voices segments. Registration is open tomorrow, so please show your support by registering as soon as possible. Then on April 8th and April 29th, we will have part 1 and part 2 of vaccination certificates and identity management. This is a complex and timely controversial topic, and you don't want to miss it. In the first episode, we will try to capture the requirements for this new secure credential and explore the landscape of needed policy, including data protection, privacy, and institutional arrangements. While in the second, we will cover in detail the possible pathways to getting it done, including platforms, enabling technologies, concept of operations, and the issue of standards, interoperability, and trust. We have received a record number of proposals, but we have not made the selection for the 2 panels yet, and we have kept the call for participation open to ensure we get the broadest and highest quality perspectives on this topic. So I encourage you to submit your proposals as soon as possible. The call will close March 2nd instead of March 15 as advertised before. So this week is your last chance. Beyond April, our pipeline is already well-defined and has a series of exciting themes, including some fresh country progress reports and some hot topics on the sectorial use of identity. In the interest of time today, I won't share the details. Instead, we'll do it in upcoming episodes. But before I forget, if you are watching us on YouTube, please subscribe and activate the bell so we can keep you informed with some great content. Of course, we would love to have you participate live so you can be part of the dialogue as it happens through the chat, live Q&A, and community voices. Back to today's topic, infant identification and the legal identity agenda. I like to put this topic in context of our mission as an Identity for All movement and explain why we chose this topic today. As you all know, identity, or more accurately, proof of identity, which I will use interchangeably with identity throughout this livecast, is not just a testament of who you are, but is actually what determines what you are entitled to or what rights you're able to assert. As a consequence, there are many flavors of identity depending on what they empower you to do. Today, the term identity is often accompanied by different qualifiers, such as legal, foundational, digital, service-oriented, economic, functional, self-sovereign, social media, etc., etc. Among all those flavors, legal identity occupies a unique place. It's an official government-backed identity that empowers you to exercise your legal rights. You can say without a pun, it is the mother of all identities. While these rights may vary slightly from state to state, they invariably include right to nationality, residence, work, mobility, state protection, the right to present oneself to elections, and the right to vote, among others. So we're not talking about access to services or logging onto social media. We're talking about rights without which an individual simply cannot live with dignity and enjoy a recognized legal status in a democratic society. This is what we mean by fundamental rights. Now, if we analyze the legal basis of every one of these fundamental rights, no matter where in the world, we see that they are invariably preconditioned on few elements of evidence about your origin. The most critical ones are when you were born, place where you were born, who are your parents. Let us call these the immutable evidence of origin, IEO. The immutable evidence of origin, IEO. These IEOs are normally fixed through birth registration and should appear on your birth certificate if you're lucky to have one. So from the outset, birth registration is the foundation of legal identity, or more accurately, a proxy for it. Of course, birth registration is also a pillar of value for child welfare and protection activities, which are very important topics, but are not the subject of today's livecast. So we must accept that establishing proof of legal identity for the flow, meaning new births, should be done through birth registration and certification. Here, SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 16.9, makes that linkage clear in its text. By 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. The role of birth registration is even more explicit in the associated indicator, which tracks progress towards achieving this goal by measuring the percentage of children under the age of 5 who have been registered. While it leads to an acceptable operational definition of legal identity for the flow, SDG 16.9 is silent when it comes to the stock or the existing adult population, among whom many may not have had a birth certificate ever. The international community struggled for a few years to define universal legal identity so as to cover the stock and the flow alike. By 2019, the UN Legal Identity Expert Group, the predecessor of the UN Legal Identity Agenda, officially adopted the following definition. Legal identity is defined as the basic characteristics of an individual's identity, name, sex, place, and date of birth, conferred through registration and the issuance of a certificate by an authorized civil registration authority following the occurrence of birth. In the absence of birth registration, legal identity may be conferred by a legally recognized identification authority. This system should be linked to the civil registration system to ensure a holistic approach to legal identity from birth to death. Legal identity is retired by the issuance of a death certificate by the civil registration authority upon registration of death. Well, 100 words. This definition was the outcome of tedious negotiations among many actors with inputs from UNICEF, UNDP, UNDESA, UNHCR, the World Bank, ID for Africa, among others. It's an acceptable definition, but I find it lacks, in its lack of succinctness, it obscures the essence of legal identity. I prefer to reformulate it by making it explicit, making explicit a concept that's implicit in these 100 words. And that's the concept of traceability. Traceability is the binding or linking of an identity to its IEOs, the immutable evidence of origin, birth date, birthplace, and to the progenitors that gave it birth. This leads to the following more elegant and succinct definition of legal identity, which works equally well in all situations, stock and flow included, civil register present or absent. Simply put, legal identity is an identity that's traceable. Legal identity is an identity that is traceable. Of course, traceability should cover all the possible pathways. It can be achieved through a reliable link between a person and a civil register record or certificate, and in the absence of civil registration, through other proxies for the IEOs, deemed acceptable by a legally recognized identification authority, including community attestations and other administrative documentation. It can even be done in some cases through well-defined naturalization evidence provided for by the law. For me, without traceability, there could not be legal identity, even if the identity is fixed through biometrics and is unique. In most cases, the simple possession of a birth certificate provides acceptable traceability, but we can do better than that if we are able to link a person irrefutably to their birth records instead of just relying on the possession of a document. There is hope that this can be achieved, especially closer we get to the birth event. which brings us to the subject of infant identification, which is the topic of today's livecast. Today, we have an impressive panel of experts to explore the issue of traceability of the flow in the context of birth registration and infant identification. We leave the challenge of traceability of the stock, hopefully, to a future episode. I'm pleased to welcome our illustrious panel for today's episode. With us, we have Cornelius Williams from UNICEF, Dr. Aaron Ramodumo from South Africa Department of Home Affairs, Tulimeke Munyika from Home Affairs Namibia, who's also the new ID for Africa duly appointed ambassador, Annette Forsingdal from the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems in Canada, Professor Jain, Michigan State University, Alexandra Grigore from Simprints. I will welcome all panelists. I will start with one-on-one with Cornelius about the UN Legal Identity Agenda and UNICEF's perspective on Africa's progress towards achieving universal civil registration by 2030. Then we will visit with South Africa and Namibia to get their perspectives on how they are dealing or planning to deal with the question of traceability and linkage of child ID to the origin. Then we will hear about some research studies from the Center for CRVS Excellence on the role of e-notification in establishing infant identity, especially in the era of COVID. After that, we will switch gears and we will hear an update from Professor Jain on where we stand with infant ID through fingerprints and biometrics, which promises to solve the traceability problem. We will then close the lineup with a presentation from Simprints, where we will talk about the practicality, ethical, data protection, and other considerations when it comes to taking fingerprints of children. This will be followed by a panel discussion and community voices. If you have something pertinent to say and you want to join the panel, you can press the button to raise your hand on Zoom when I invite participation, and the operator can elevate you to the panel. We love to hear from you. So basically, we are going to have the series of presentations, unless there are some pressing questions to clarify what the presenter has said, we will address the questions in the panel discussion at the end. So without any further delay, I would like to ask the operator to prepare the panel for the one-on-one with Cornelius Williams. Thank you. Cornelius, good morning to you from New York. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Actually, the weather is better today.
Yes, indeed. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. This is not the first time we had you on. I would like to start perhaps with you by asking you if you could give an overview of the UN Legal Identity Agenda to some of our attendees. So what is the UN Legal Identity Agenda? Which are the agencies driving it, and what's the objective?
Thank you very much, actually, Dr. Joseph, and thanks for having me on. The UN Legal Identity Agenda, you've already given the definition about the UN Legal Identity and what we mean by legal identity. The UN Legal Identity Agenda is linked to the SDG 16.9, and it brings together all these agencies where we are committed as one UN, and it's part of the UN reform, how we work together as one UN. So you have 14 agencies that have come together to work to ensure that actually the world is able to achieve the targets in 16.9. Now, we have a secretariat, and the secretariat is made up of UNDESA, as you rightly mentioned, UNDP. As we are all aware, UNDP has been working long in identity management and on electoral registration. And then you have UNICEF actually in the secretariat. Then we have other agencies actually, you mentioned some of them, UNHCR, WHO, UNFPA, right, IOM, OHCHR, right? Virtually all the UN agencies actually that are operational. But you know that we have different forms of identity, right? I mean, and so what we're saying is when we speak to the governments, when we speak to partners, we want to speak as one UN. We want to use that definition that you've spoken about to engage with government and to provide them with the technical support that that is required for them to be able to achieve this goal that we're all aspiring to. That is what we're saying. And that means actually that at the country level, the UN country teams have come together, again, the same agencies around the table to speak to governments. In Africa, we have the UNECA, who's leading and coordinating the work and working also with the African Union. In Asia, we also have the Economic Commission as well, working with actually the governments in Asia. So it's a one UN agenda.
One voice, one UN voice interfacing.
One voice, one message.
One message. Now, Cornelius, I mean, UNICEF traditionally, as mission has been child welfare and child protection. How do you see basically how the UN legal agenda contributing to achieving the welfare and protection of children? Because while the legal identity agenda is important for other reasons, for example, for democracy, for social protection, how do you see UNICEF's core mission being reinforced by the UN legal agenda?
So the core mission, actually, UNICEF definitely, it's about protection of children, working on their survival and working on their development. Without identity, access to service is a problem. Without identity, and protection becomes a problem. Let me give you an example, okay, of these issues. If you do not, we've seen it during this COVID period. If the child doesn't have an identity, how will the child be able to access the child benefit in issues of poverty? How will the child be able to, on normal circumstances, go to school? So access to service is dependent on a child having an identity. And as you rightly pointed out, in situation where there is a good birth registration, in situation where the child has his birth certificate, that is their passport to all the services that is required for their development. It is also their passport to the protection that is required. They will not be tried as an adult, right? They would be protected from the trafficking that we talk about. They would be protected from child labor. They would be protected from early marriage, right? They would have access to school. And if the family needs a grant or support for poverty, they would have that access. So it is the bedrock. It also underlines all the SDGs. How would you be able to monitor the SDGs if you don't know your denominator?
Yeah, indeed. Excellent. So we are here talking about whether it's in child protection or in the legal identity agenda. We are talking about the challenge of the invisibles, and some have called it the scandal of the invisibles. Where are we today in this problem? Where do we stand in terms of the number of invisible children under the age of 5 worldwide?
So first of all, let me start with talking about infants. So I must say that actually 40 million infants are not registered worldwide. 56 million lack birth certificates. And then you go to the under 5s, okay? These children that I've mentioned feed into the backlog of 166 million unregistered children or under 5 and 237 million children who do not have a certificate globally. And most of these children are in Africa.
In Africa. So basically, is it correct to say that 25% of the children on this earth are invisible?
Yes, these children are born, they live their life, they do not have access to service, they're not in any administrative data system, the states and the government do not know these children exist. Okay, when we count the SDGs, these children would not be counted, right? Okay, and we know that actually, usually, especially for minority children and exclusion, these children are the one left behind. So they leave no one behind. We will not be able to turn that rhetoric into action if we do not ensure that these children are registered.
Right. I mean, I think there has been some progress. If we look at the numbers from 2000, last 20 years, thanks to the statistics of UNICEF, I mean, we were at 60% and now we're up to 75% of all children are registered. So 15%. But does that give you concern? I mean, it took 20 years to get 15% done. I mean, of course, had that not happened, we would have ended up with another 100 million invisible children. So your advocacy has been very, very important in that regard. But now we're looking at the home stretch. We're getting to the 2030. And do we have another 20 years to get another 15%? Or where do you think the trend is happening?
So we know what works now, okay? As you were saying 15 years ago, there were trial and errors. We know what works, right? I mean, we've seen the massive leap in India. We've seen the massive leap in places like South Africa and Namibia, right? And we've seen the massive leap in the continent. You take the Maghreb, the North Africa. So we can do it. We know what works. For example, okay, twinning with the health centers and the health sector. Register a child where the child is born. We know what works. I see colleagues from Namibia. I was in Namibia and I saw how they did it. In less than 5 years, they did it. So it is just the political will and put in the resources. And we should, as I keep saying, focus on the birth registration and the certification. They have to make sure that they resource their civil registration system. These countries that I'm talking about, that I'm saying are examples actually, I mean, are countries that have resourced their civil registration system, ensuring that the child is registered from birth. So the annual rate of change, we can change the graph. We can change the graph and we can be able to do it in 10 years. There is also the issue of digitization. We have seen it work in Tanzania. There is also the issue of decentralization. We have seen it work. So the concept, the proof of concept is done. We know what works.
Right, but actually, Cornelius, does that mean we have to take another look at UNICEF's own projections? Because UNICEF's projections, if I'm not mistaken, in West and Central Africa by 2030, you're projecting 65% is the best case scenario of those who will be registered. And then in Eastern and Southern Africa, it will be 53% is the best case scenario. So do we have to have another look to say there is a different type of acceleration because now we understand what's happening? And so those statistics are not going to be the ones by which we're operating?
So we showed the level of effort. So what we were trying to do was to call on government to see how we're going to increase this effort. That actually, if we double the effort, okay, we can be able to get better statistics from these countries.
So you do feel, however, do you feel that it's time to press the alarm button, saying that by 2030, if we stay where we are, we're never going to get to the 2030 SDG target?
Yes, certainly.
So we are now pressing the alarm button. This is the time we need to press the alarm button. We have less than 10 years left, and our current target projections do not get us to the target unless something dramatically happens. I want to come back to the question of something dramatically happens, but do you think African countries or other developing nations have the capacity to monitor and give us the statistics about what's happening? Do we have monitoring of SDG progress possible in all of these countries?
Well, that's an interesting point because there are two ways we do the monitoring. We do it by the population-based surveys, and we do it where you have a robust administrative system.
Mm-hmm.
So we are convinced that we can be able to pick up the data, right? And if you look at the statistics, okay, you can see year by year how more and more countries are able to measure their coverage.
Okay, so you're encouraged that not only are they reinforcing the birth registration and the civil registration, but they're also building capacity to monitor their progress. You think they're open, because the statistics that we're getting, we get some statistics from certain studies that are contradictory to the national statistics, and so I think that's an issue for the international community to address. How do you feel about the coordination in the monitoring?
So one of the, as I said, we have two ways, okay, the administrative data and the population-based survey.
Right.
And more we've seen government getting the administrative system better. You know, the quality is improving. You know the old adage, you use your data, the quality improves as you continue to use your data. So we're optimistic that the quality of those data would improve.
Cornelius, UNICEF has outlined sort of a set of 5 recommendations about how to improve the birth registration in order to achieve the goal. For example, I can read them from your document. Of course, you can read them from the top of your head. Provide every child with birth certificate, empower all parents, regardless of gender, to register their children, link birth registration to social services, invest in technology, safe and innovative, engage communities to demand birth registration. So those are your 5 pillars for trying to change the reality on the ground. Now, to me, those sound like wise business as usual. Do you think there are also disruptive recommendations that you can bring to the table to tell countries how to accelerate this registration and meet this challenge?
Well, they sound like business as usual, but I can tell you that what we have seen, okay, is that definitely if you do the linking and the twinning, it is a disruptive strategy. First of all, right, let us take into account that the issue of a one-stop shop. Okay, in countries, there are several countries which I had visited before, right? Senegal, Mozambique, Tanzania, and even Namibia, where they made sure that they had a one-stop shop. That has cut down on the number of times a client or a parent has to come in to register their children. That is transformative. You go in, you register your child, and you get your birth certificate. It cut down on the cost to the parents. It makes the system more efficient, right? So for me, that is transformative. And what was interesting was that governments were changing their legal framework. You know, actually the difference between the 2 legal frameworks, the common law system and the civil law system, right? And how the civil law system is quite cumbersome, okay? In Angola, they made sure that they were able to do the registration in the health center. A one-stop shop, that's what we're advocating for. That's one. The second thing is actually, we have seen actually how digitization, right, can also assist. And digitization can be transformative, but you also have to ensure that you have the policy framework around it. I'm not just talking about just bringing computers. It is digitization of the entire system. Now, if you digitize your system, you cut down on all these logistics challenges and bottlenecks that you have. 2, you improve the data privacy and the protection and the legal frameworks around it, right? And so you can, I've seen people moving with that system straight into the population register. So it is transformative, right? The other issue actually, which you have said actually, I mean, is no matter what we do, we have to ensure that we engage the parents. They need to see the value.
Right.
They need to see that's constant. That's constant. But 2 things we're saying: twinning, okay, twinning with your health sector, That is transformative. Make sure that every child that is born in your health facility is registered. Let us not have a difference between the immunization rate and the registration rate. Let us not have a difference where the children born in a health facility is higher than the birth registration rate. It has to be the two. Then close your gap between your registration and your certification.
So do you advocate basically qualifying some of the health professionals as registrars, or do you advocate opening up offices for registration near or in health facilities?
I have seen the success from the two.
Okay, so
I have seen countries who mandated their health, legally mandated their health workers as registrars. I have seen countries who can afford it open up registration points in the health facilities.
Okay, excellent. So switching gears quickly in the interest of time, UNICEF and the UN over the last few years, as I've been interacting with the organizations, have been reticent to embrace biometrics. How does UNICEF today feel about biometrics and the role of biometrics in the legal identity agenda, but also in the child protection agenda for children, infants and children?
So, I mean, that's a very important point, okay? First of all, we feel that biometrics should not replace the birth registration and the civil registration system. Mm-hmm. Okay, biometrics can contribute to it, but it should not replace it, right? The second issue actually is biometrics have to be tailored to the needs of young children, especially newborns and infants. So most of the technology that we see out there are not high enough in level of performance, quality and performance to ensure this inclusion that we're talking about. And there's a real risk of inappropriate use of this system and devices. And there are many unanswered questions that we have to answer, right, around the use of this technology. Right. And what's the value there? Right. Two, actually, we also feel that we need to build stronger systems, actually, and this includes innovative technology. So it's not only about biometrics. And then the most critical thing, if we introduce biometrics as everything, and I like to watch some of the things you were saying about legal identity, as everything, we must ensure that it has a robust regulatory framework and responsible data principle. So we have to see, okay, put in place, governments have to put in place a system that has that. And the use case, why are we collecting this data? What is the value added for the children, right? And what we're saying actually is right from the beginning, you have to ensure that there's no risk posed to the rights of these children, that the rights are explicitly considered in any new system and it's not an add-on later.
Exactly. Cornelius, excellent. We're going to come back. We're going to keep you with us at the end. There will be a panel. There are lots of questions that are emerging. So thank you so much for this insight. Clearly, this is not the final word on the subject. We're going to be engaging over many webinars and livecasts to continue this important discussion. We want to move on to hear from the other panelists, their prepared remarks. However, before we do that, we have a couple of polls, which we are going to ask the participants to participate in, the attendees to participate in. So I asked the operator to put up the first poll, please. They're very simple polls. We may get some insights, we may get nothing. We'll just see. So thank you, William. Cornelius, we'll come back to you in a second.
Thank you, Joseph.
So the first question, which is an interesting question, do you have an official birth certificate? En français, avez-vous un acte de naissance officiel? So we want to know if there are lots of people who are adults today who don't have a birth certificate or an official birth certificate. I know many. So let's see where that stands in terms of the universality of this group. Okay, we will continue. just please participate. It's important that we get everybody, just to give us enough statistics to see. But clearly, for this community, all the adults, it's trending towards 90% have a birth certificate, official birth certificate, and 10% do not. So I feel I understand your challenge when you're talking about not having a birth certificate. It was a challenge for me as well. So it's very important that we are traced to our origin, and the birth certificate is the best way to do that. So I'm glad to see this in place. I'm glad to see that the majority, overwhelming majority here has a birth certificate. So operator, let's end the poll and just get the next poll on. So it's 93% yes and 7% no. Okay, so this ends the poll. Just another quick poll that we're asking the audience. Again, these are not scientific polls because this is a pre-select group of people. The second question we're asking you, do you think your country is on track to meeting SDG 16.9 by 2030? Pensez-vous que votre pays est sur la voie d'accomplir les ODD 16,9 à 2030? Okay. Again, this is not a scientific poll because this is the whole world. We have 130 countries represented here, and these are personal opinions. Now we're getting something somewhat different. We have some pessimism here. We see 26% saying that, or 27% do not believe that their countries are going to meet the 2030 target of 16.9. And so it's almost coming down to 70% yes and 30% no as the numbers keep growing. Okay, I think this is an interesting insight. We do share that concern. We do share the concern that there is a significant number of countries in the world that may not be on target to meet the 2030 deadline for 16.9. Okay, operator, end the poll. Thank you so much. Now we would like to move to South Africa with Dr. Aaron, who is going to come and present to us their perspective. Thank you, Cornelius, and let's welcome Dr. Aaron.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I present to you South Africa's position on traceability of infants' identity. Throughout the world, identity management has become a subject of interest. Can you roll over to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. That is the presentation outline. Next slide, please. Like I said, the purpose of my presentation is basically to provide South Africa's position or give South Africa's perspective in relation to infant identity, the allocation of unique identity number, and how it is linked to parents, and our progressive and our movement towards the progressive realization of the identity management in South Africa. The next slide, please. The context is we started this issue around identity management in 1985 when we adopted a common and unique identity number in the country. We then moved towards ensuring that any form of identity that is given to an individual or allocated to an individual is allocated to him or her from cradle to grave, that is from birth to death. So we started improving through a program called modernization, because we wanted to protect personal identification or personal information of people and improve traceability. We are of the firm view that this technology, this process requires modern technology. It requires also a fit for purpose technology or scanners and solutions through which we are able to link the child to the parents. So as we moved along, we then realized that the most important element is that much as we are linking a child to a mother through a birth registration process, at times, the idea of a child would be at risk of theft by some individuals, be it within the government department or within the Home Affairs or outside Home Affairs. We then thought the most important element would then to move towards ensuring that the identity of a child is never stolen from such a child and that it is kept linked to the parents. The next slide. So what you see there, it's a mechanism through which we link the child to a mother. In South Africa, 98% of children are born within health facilities. And 96% of South African children or any child born within the country, it's registered within 30 days because the law says register your child within 30 days. Home Affairs is available within health facilities, predominantly public health facilities. Once a mother delivers a baby, a proof of birth is provided to a mother. There is a Home Affairs official within the health facility who will then verify the documents provided by the mother and register the child and link the child to the mother and immediately issue a birth certificate. Next slide, please. So the next slide then projects how we hope to improve identity or infant identity management. Like I said, we started in 1985, a child would be born, would be issued an ID number and a birth certificate. In 2009, we started linking the child to the parents. But now, from 2020, up until now, we are developing the identity management policy, which we hope will be approved somewhere around 2021. We are providing various options with which we can make it tight and make sure that any infant identity is not stolen. So once it is approved, there will be various options as to how we further improve the infant identity. The next slide, please. In the work that we do as Home Affairs, we are guided by, one, the Constitution, out of which we derived various principles. One, we affirm the fulfillment of natural and juristic persons. We are giving them the right to identity, democratic values of human dignity and other freedoms. Once you get your identity and it's not taken away from you, it's legally provided to you, then you will ultimately have a vote to, a right to vote ultimately. That is provided non-discriminately, equally, irrespective of race, sex, gender, religion, culture, or even age, because you normally get your identity number once you are born. So this process is compulsory in the country, and we would want to have an element of biometric linked or associated with the ID number provided. The most important element is that it protects all persons, particularly children. Once they are registered and identified, you would know this is a child. You protect such a child against maltreatment or any form of ill treatments or neglect or abuse or exploitative labor practices, child trafficking, through identity management. So we believe that that process is developmental and is driven by democratic values of accountability. In what we do, we are ethical, we are fair, and we are impartial. By that, we shall be removing the scandal of invisibility and leaving no one behind. Proceed, please. Next slide. Now, given the policy development process that we are in, we have various possibilities of infant identity that we might, upon approval of the policy that we are busy developing, can opt for, be it your palm prints, your fingerprints, your footprints, the photo and facial recognition. The photo is applicable when a child turns 16 because that is when a child gets an identity. We would want to take it to an earlier time, immediately a child is born. One of the elements would be an iris. Proceed, please. Now, in conclusion, whilst we want to build a policy around biometric capture of infants and children, we still have not made a selection of the specific technology. And that continues to be a subject of research. And I hope researchers will provide other options to choose from. That is, by the time the policy is fully approved, we would be knowing. And we call upon all countries of the world to continue providing and sharing their experiences and knowledge around possible forms of identity. We're working closely with CSIR in South Africa to find acceptable option for infant identity management. We believe biometrics for infants is inevitable, and we are building a strategy around biometrics. However, we have not built a specification of what precise technology to use. We are still in that process.
Right.
As South Africa, we are accelerating towards the biometric infant identity because once you choose a particular form of biometric, you link that to an ID number given to a child and link that to a mother. There is no way such an identity can be taken away from a child. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron Ramodumo. In fact, the fact that you are building the policy ahead of the technology is a good idea. And it reminds me of what happened when the international community built the policy for face recognition for electronic passports. Back in the early 90s, and I participated in the specification of face as the biometric for the electronic passport, there was a lot of objection. People said, well, face was not ready. But when you look at the progress technology was making, look at the trajectory of the progress, if you did not start the policy now, the technology will be ready before the policy is ready. So bravo that you're taking the approach, let's get the policy right, and now may the best technology and best specification emerge as the progress of research continues to happen. So thank you for this wonderful presentation. We would like to keep you with us for the end when we will come back to community voices and questions and answers. Thank you once again. Operator, please, let's move on to Namibia now with Tulimeke. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay, As I've been introduced, I'm Tulimeke from the Ministry of Home Affairs, Immigration, Safety and Security of the Government of the Republic of Namibia. And today I'll be talking about Namibia's birth notification system, and specifically on how using that notification system, we have managed to try and establish the legal identity of a child by linking such birth of that child to the profile of the mother, that is via a unique identifier. Just to start off, if we can move on with the slides as well. Our legislative framework really is such that the legal identity of a child is entrenched in the Constitution of the Republic of Namibia. And it specifically says that every child has the right from birth to know and be cared for by both parents. So this really goes to say that establishing this legal identity must start from the time when a child is born. There are also international and regional legislative frameworks that you are part of. And I just want to highlight that our Act, the 1963 Act that regulates the registration of births, marriages, and deaths, specifically speaks about notifications as well. So the legal requirement to notify a birth has been in existence from as far back as 1963. But I can also just mention here already that we are currently reforming the law, and we have just submitted the Civil Registration and Identification Bill to the drafter so it can go through to Parliament. And in that bill, we have specifically made mention of electronic notifications of birth. So you can see that there is a change from the manual notification that we have been using to the electronic notifications, and that this is now specifically being set out in the law. I won't get into a lot of details on that one. Can we move with the slides, operator? I just want to now slightly, just very briefly deal with the foundation upon which the e-birth notification system is actually built. It's been a process that has been coming over the years. It did not happen overnight. So in 2000, the government designed and started developing its own national population registration system. This is a system that basically hosts and manages the National Population Register, and this is based on the old identification system that we had in place. In 2010, an e-governance policy was launched, and it specifically dealt with the automation of all historical records of birth. The birth registration module was then added onto that system. The death module was also added on. Then in 2013, a birth registration module was deployed nationwide. Marriage also came on. We're trying to treat all vital events as important as the others. And then we had a turnaround strategy that lasted about 18 months, through which we tried to perfect the way that we do things. Nothing is perfect yet. It's still a work in progress. But in 2017, we then piloted and deployed the e-birth notification system, which was based on the NPRS. The foundation really was NPRS, that was then rolled out in 2017. And in 2018, we also piloted and deployed the e-birth notification system. So you'll get to see that from around 2000 up to a point in 2017, that's about 17 years that it took to step by step build the system to ensure that when we now did the e-birth notification system, the foundation was solid. Operator, I still cannot see my slides. If you can just work on that. What then happened, let me maybe just deal with the NPRS, how a person's profile actually looks like on the NPRS, which is the population register. An individual's profile is created around a unique identifier of that person. So that unique identifier, it would contain the biometric details of the individual, which will have their birth record, particulars of their parents, their identification attributes, which are now linked to the national ID, marriage and divorce, if they do get married and divorce, well, unfortunately, also when they die, the death record is still on. Next slide. So that is, in essence, in context of our presentation, that is in essence how a mother's profile would look like on NPRS, because we'll now shortly get to see that the birth notification will be linked to that profile of the mother that I've just described exactly how the model is built. The e-notification model is a model that is really linked. The e-notification has both e-birth and e-death notification components to it, and this is directly linked onto the National Population Registration System. So the profile of the child on the e-birth notification would be linked to the mother's system, to the mother's profile on the NPRS. Now, the electronic notification system is mostly managed, actually wholly managed by Ministry of Health that notifies the birth, and then the Namibian police would notify also some of the deaths that are not natural deaths. And this is now linked to the NPRS, which is administered by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So we're talking in e-birth notification, we're talking about two separate ministries that are working together in order to make sure that the notification and the registration are actually together. Next slide. I am now going to deal with how the e-birth notification process is. When a woman is admitted in hospital, in fact, before that happens, ideally they are going for their antenatal care. And during antenatal care, the importance of birth registration is brought to their attention. The requirements for birth registration are also brought to their attention. Then during confinement, with the mother ideally knowing already what is going to happen in terms of birth notification and birth registration, the admission of the mother is done on the hospital system. It is also done on the e-birth notification system. The mother's ID is verified and the mother's profile is sort of entered on the notification system. Then when the birth actually occurs, a profile is an entry is created for the child. There are certain parts that need to be verified in respect of the child, such as on which date were they born, at which place were they born, AGPA score, all those are recorded. Then the mother would have presented an ID. That ID already exists on the NPRS. And the e-notification system is going to pull the mother's record, and then the record of the mother and that entry of the child are actually linked together. The child's profile is then signed off and a birth notification is produced. What would then happen is that the mother or any of the parents, this can happen even during confinement, is that they complete a birth registration form that is taken over to Home Affairs, and then the registration is done. Now, during the registration, because remember at the notification part, it is only the particulars of the mother that are put in there. The particulars of the father are not there. This is now contained on the birth registration form, including now the names. If the names have now been given, the names would then appear on the form. During registration, this information is put on the system. This is now Home Affairs. You are done with Ministry of Health. This is put on the system. The birth is then registered and immediately certified, and a birth certificate is produced. Next slide. What is important to note is that the identity of the mother is verified when the mother is admitted in hospital with the delivery. What links the profile of the child to that of the mother is the unique identifier that the mother already has. But what also happens during the notification time is that there is a notification reference number that is generated automatically by the system. And this also comes and is linked when the profile of the child is created during registration. that reference remains on that particular child's profile until death. It cannot be deleted. We can go through to the next slide. And I want to now just quickly zoom into the unique identifiers themselves. The unique identifier, which is created during the notification period, is a number that is linked to the date when the notification is being done, including the date and milliseconds. So it's a 13 digit that is created. And this, like I said, remains until the death. Now the mother's ID number, which is also unique, is linked. If you turn up for birth registration, even during a notification and you do not have an ID, you do not yet have an ID, but have a birth certificate, that can also still be linked. But if the mother has absolutely nothing, the hospital staff is going to use whatever information you used during registration in order to do the notification. The rest of the information that is missing is then put in during the registration. After the notification is done, a registration also happens with Home Affairs, and another unique number is created, which is the birth entry number. Previously, there were some mishaps that it was possible for one person, for one entry number to be assigned to 2 or more people. But since the system has been, that was with manual notifications and registrations. But now that we have electronic, almost everything is now electronic except when the system is off, it is no longer possible that you can have a birth entry number that belongs to 2 people. So another unique number is created at the time of birth registration. When you turn 16, you then are assigned an ID number when you apply for an ID, and that also is a unique number. This is the number that if you were the child that was born and was notified, when you eventually have your own child, this is the number that will be used to start the process for your child to also have their own number, and eventually when you die, there is also a unique number, which is a death entry number that is created. So you can see that from the whole civil registration process that runs from the time you are born up to the time that you die, there is actually a unique number that is assigned to you for each of those vital events. Next slide. Who exactly are the role players in the birth notification system? We have seen that it's 2 ministries. So you have the Ministry of Health that is responsible for the notifications, and then the Ministry of Home Affairs is responsible for registration and certification. What is important to note is that the way that our system has been set up is that both public and private hospitals can actually do notifications. So it is not something that is only reserved for the public sector, so to say. So we do have private hospitals that are also doing notifications, and the process is exactly the same, whether it is in a public or in a private healthcare facility. Notification is only possible within that first year of birth. If a child's birth has not been notified, after 12 months, you can no longer do a notification because obviously a higher burden of proof is required to verify your identity, and therefore you just go straight to birth registration, and this will then be handled by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Between the notification and the registration stage, there is room that is made there for people to be able to gather the documentation of the father, for instance, if this was not available, and to take care of certain cultural norms that certain people observe. For example, there's some traditions that would require that before a child can be named, certain things have to happen. So they have room to do that, but ideally, the law actually requires the birth must be registered within 14 days. When you move over to the Ministry of Home Affairs, then for the registration and certification, because the profiles are already linked, the staff at Home Affairs is going to use the reference number that was created by the notification system, and that number would have been given to the parent. And this is what you want as your unique identifier for you to be able to access the record of the mother in order to do the registration. Every staff member, including myself, have our own usernames and our own passwords for everything that we do on the system. And for both the notification and the national population registration processes, it leaves a trace of everything that you do in there. So for a person's individual profile, it would actually be able to show you who notified the birth and who did the registration at Home Affairs. In essence, that is how the birth notification system works. On to the next slide, if we are still together, operator, because my slides are blank on the screen.
Yeah, could we wrap up quickly, Tulimeke?
Yes, we are moving towards the end. Our country is divided into 14 regions, and among these 14 regions, we have 46 hospital-based facilities for birth registration, and 65 hospitals have notifications. So 65 facilities can do the notification, and you can go to a civil registration office within the hospital itself for you to be able to do the registration. And this is really made in an effort to bring services closer to the people. You are able to, by the time you are discharged from hospital as a mother, you should be able to actually have a birth certificate in your hand. Now, we have done a bit of figures to try and see, has there been an improvement in the use of the system? In 2016, our intercensal survey indicated that Namibia had a birth registration rate of about 87.8%. Now, we have seen when we compare on the system that if you look at the figures on the births that are actually notified and those that are registered, we can still see that there is a discrepancy that not every notification actually results in a registration, and that can be due to various reasons. One of them could be that the birth was indeed notified, but when the registration was done, that notification was not picked up and the registration was done as if it had not been notified. There's still a lot that we need to do in terms of public advocacy to make sure that the systems are running as smooth as they should, but we can see the trend that is actually picking up. We are doing more notification now than when we first introduced the system in 2017. This system has ensured that the child's legal identity is secured and is linked to something already from the very beginning. We can measure the notifications versus the timely registrations from the information that we can see on the system, but we know that there are still rooms for improvement. We know that there is still, the notification versus registration requires some more concerted efforts between all the stakeholders to make sure that we close all the gaps. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful presentation on actually highlighting how important it is to integrate notification in the registration process, and it's giving a model for multi-ministry collaboration. We're going to come back to some of the points that you've raised in the discussion. Thank you so much. Can we bring in Annette, please, so we can keep the rhythm going? It will be related to e-notification as well. So Annette?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Annette Forsingdal. I'm with the Center of Excellence for CIBS System House at the International Development System in Canada. Sorry, I have a problem with children here. Okay, the Center of Excellence is a global CIBS knowledge hub, and we work to strengthening civil registration and vital statistics through research, knowledge generation, and facilitation of access to expertise and direct technical expertise that we, amongst others, do together with DFF and UNICA and UNFPA. Today, I would like to set focus on some research that we have done in terms of ensuring birth registration or like digital identity from birth, and that has played a significant role now during the COVID pandemic. Can we go to the next slide? So in April 2020, UNICA conducted a survey to understand the impact of the national measures that was put in place in different African countries, as well as the initial responses. This was supported by the Center of Excellence. As you can see on the slide, what we found was that 75% of all civil registration system had been impacted by the national measure put in place or the pandemic itself. So what we did, we agreed with UNICA to see how we could best document country initiative that were mitigating, so we could kind of, that was actually mitigating the negative impact in the countries. And one of the things we were particularly interested in was to understand the role and the value of notification systems that many countries have put in place and implemented over the last decade. So we did a study of 6 countries, and that is the research that I would like to present to you today. So the overarching kind of aim was to understand, have the digital effort put in place by African governments made these civil registration system more resilient and ensuring identity from start? And have these systems enabled data to actually be used for health surveillance during the COVID-19 pandemic? So it had kind of that dual kind of aspect. We looked at the system's ability to establish identity, but also the ability to generate data that could be used during the pandemic for health surveillance. Next slide, thank you. Sorry, we just have to go back one slide. Okay, so here, and this is something that we have already spoken about. Traditional notification is the first step in a birth and death registration process. The notification, you can kind of say, is your eyewitness account that a vital event has occurred. As registrars, we do not know that this event has occurred traditional before people would stand in front of us. So, and it's very, very important that all these documents are accurate and trustworthy, since it's being used in other government business processes. So this is just what I'm showing here is a little bit of an architecture. It's simplified, and it's kind of the traditional model of how things has worked, that for example, Minister of Health is giving you the proof. They notify that an event has happened, and then it's the responsibility of the registration office to establish this legally and issue a birth record. All this becomes like foundational data for the issuance of identity credential, but for also providing services. And then again, you also use this data for generating of vital statistics. So over the past year, this model has been used all over Africa to strengthening their civil registration. So can we just go to the next slide? Okay, okay. So what was the key finding for the research that we did? Has these different country initiative, have they actually made the civil registration system more resilient during COVID? And what value has specifically the notification system played? So it basically showed that countries with electronic notification and registration system had less, or in some cases minimum disruption during COVID. And we found out what we did. So through using system generated data, we compared the notification and the registration to see if there was any discrepancies. What we also find found that that online tools make it possible to notify and register vital events that as they occur, which creates continuity and system resilience during a crisis. Where registration is delayed in the traditional systems due to restriction imposed by government or illness or fear of infection for coming to the civil registration offices, as long as there exists a record created by, for example, the health facility, people can return later and register these records. The most important part is that somehow a record exists with the basic data. Also, again, as already mentioned, is also kind of underscored the absolutely important or integrational part of health system in ensuring well-functioning civil registration systems. And it's so important, as we also hear from both South Africa and Namibia, to have health as part of this system. We also found that there was a general trend that government are taking more responsibility to actually help citizens to communicate information or report information on civil events in a more friendly and a facilitated manner than we have seen in the future, where the burden to register was most often placed on the citizens or residents themselves. We found that these designs are very country specific. The 6 countries that we studied, which is Uganda, Mozambique, Namibia, Rwanda, Burkina Faso, all and had very different models. Some had chosen the 2-step model, the traditional model. Others, like Tanzania, has gone towards what we call a 1-step model, where the health officials has been given the legal mandate to actually do the legal registrations. Some of the countries we also found are actually combining close to complete data set. However, these data is at this point not being used for health surveillance. So this is definitely an area we, within the civil registration and vital statistic kind of field, is going to look at. There is amazing data, and this data needs to be used for health surveillance, especially during an emergency where there's so much lack of data. We also find that none of these systems are absolutely perfect. There should be, of course, country specific, but we found, and it's important to keep in mind, that system can improve over time as things like technology involved. But it's still important to keep them in line with the key principles. This is one thing. When we were studying this, some of these papers has already been released, but we're still kind of working on our general kind of reflection and analysis. And I think, Joseph, you asked Cornelius this question, which of these models, would you kind of recommend? And both of them are well functioning. I think one of the biggest dilemma as a registrar, you have a responsibility to register all, but at the same time, you also have a responsibility to make sure that this is accurate data. Okay, so you always have a dilemma between outsourcing this responsibility to third parties, for example, health, and to ensure, as South Africa spoke about, that this unique identity belongs to this child and it's not stolen, and this data is absolutely accurate. And in some ways, we see that probably the 2-way model kind of ensure that validation, whereas that doesn't maybe exist to the same extent in the 1-step model, although this 1-step model really ensure that everybody is registered. I just want to show and reveal some of the data that we have collected and published, and this is all system generated data. And what we did, we basically compared the data over years and time. So the first one you see is Mozambique, and below that is Namibia, and then we have Tanzania in your right-hand corner, and below that Uganda. So you can see that all the systems continue to functioning under the first month of the pandemic. If we now have been speaking about Namibia today, you can see that there was actually in the month after the pandemic, a higher number of notifications than the previous year. And of course, that is a reflection that the system has been functioning in the health system just as well as before the pandemic. It was not affected. It's a resilient system. The same goes for Tanzania, who's also seen a continuously number of births being registered. So in Tanzania, the notification and registration is happening at the same time. So people from giving birth in health facilities go away with their birth record from the health facility immediately after the event has occurred. And you have seen that they actually also still had an increase in their recording during 2020. Mozambique and Uganda did have some kind of impact on the system. So we also see here the weakest link also lies is in the health facilities. If the mothers do not come to the health facility, it will also affect obviously the registrations. So I just want to tell that we have done these technical briefs and they are available on our website. As said, we have done a study and documented the notification system of these 6 countries. We have already published 4. Burkina Faso and Rwanda is still to be published. They're coming soon. And then we're also going to publish a synthesis brief where we compare the system and we make some analysis of how well they've been doing, and this is some of the findings that I've already presented. So I do think that, and now we're kind of speaking about, you know, what is actually the value if we are going to introduce biometrics, that these systems all prove that they're very resilient and they have the capability of having 100% coverage if you do partnering with other third parties as the Minister of Health. And my question is always, is it worth the investment to link these systems to biometric, or can the current system actually register all births and the data accurately? So with those words, I want to say thank you very much. And here is the web page, so you can go and visit some of all the knowledge work and research that we're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Annette. We'll come back to you in the Q&A. There are lots of questions that are happening, as well as community voices. We're now going to push into the biometrics for children with Professor Anil Jain.
Greetings to everyone. I'm going to talk to you some of the work which I have been doing for the past 7 years on using fingerprints for infant identification. Let me first start out by saying that this is an extremely difficult problem, and I don't think there is any commercially viable solution at this time. But we have built an end-to-end system in which we have designed our own high-resolution fingerprint reader, which is available, which has been open sourced, so anybody can download the design and build a close to 2,000 points per inch fingerprint reader for a cost of less than $100 US. We are also very fortunate to partner in this work with Dr. Anju Bhatnagar, who is a very well-known pediatrician in India, and she works at a charitable hospital called Saran Ashram Hospital, and with Dr. Prem Sadish, who is a professor of computer science, and he provided his expertise in the data collection at this charitable hospital. So this project started about 7 years ago when I was invited to visit Mr. Bill Gates and his team at the Gates Foundation. And his first question was, can biometrics be used for infant ID, so we know whether this particular child has been vaccinated or not. So we wanted to see what the field conditions were. So we went to this vaccination clinic in Benin, just outside Cotonou. And you know, the mothers have walked all long distances to come and bring the child for the vaccination center. And what you see in the back in the racks against the wall are sort of the paper records, which are simply catching dust. So in this particular project, the fingerprints were being captured of the child as the vaccination is provided. So there is a registry kept. And this was in June of 2014. Unfortunately, the individuals taking the fingerprints were not trained, and therefore the quality of that data was extremely poor, and there's nothing you can do if the data initially collected is of very poor quality. So this is the first lesson we must understand, that if the field operators are not trained to capture biometric data properly, there is no standard set, then the whole system will fail. So the requirements of the system after visiting this clinic was it has to be accurate. The speed is extremely important. If it takes 1 minute per child to capture the biometrics, it's no good. As you can see, people are waiting. It has to have a large throughput. Social acceptance by the mother or other members of the family, usability, the fingerprint reader in this particular case, or iris or whatever else you want to consider, has to be usable. System has to be of low cost. The electric power is not always reliable, so there should be a backup power. And ideally, now that the mobile phones are so powerful, all the processing and data collection should be done via that. So since I did not speak French, we decided to pursue another avenue for collecting the data. And this is the Saran Ashram Hospital in Dayalbagh, just outside Agra in India. And this started a 5-year, 6-year collaboration with this hospital and Dayalbagh Educational Institute to collect fingerprint data over time, longitudinal fingerprint collection. This is the most important. This is the second lesson. If you want to show the viability of biometrics, you have to collect the biometric data of the same child over multiple instances. In our case, we tried to do it every 3 months for 1 whole year. So we had 4 acquisitions at 4 different times for each infant. And so again, the challenge here, if you note, is that the space to collect the data is limited. The desk which you are seeing in the center of the picture that's where Dr. Bhatnagar sits and examines the patients. And after the infant has been examined by Dr. Bhatnagar, then my 2 students were sitting on the same desk with their laptop, collecting the data of the infant. And again, throughput is extremely important. So whether it's adult biometrics or infant biometrics, there's always a question about which modality we should capture. And as already been pointed out, these are the 5 common modalities which we could potentially consider: face, iris, footprint, fingerprint, palm print. And if you are familiar with the infant, you will notice that the face changes a lot day by day, the expression changes, and these are not cooperative subjects where you can tell them not to smile, not to cry, and so on. Iris capture is rather invasive. It's almost like an ophthalmologist giving an eye exam, and I think it is, in our opinion, it is not acceptable. footprint, many infants or children are walking around barefoot. Foot is dirty and you have to clean it. There's a lot of concavity in the footprint. And, and as the child grows, it just will take too much time to take off the socks and the shoes. And palm print has a problem that it has a concavity in the center. And then you have to have a large footprint for the of the palm print reader. And so for that reason, we decided to go with the fingerprint. But, infants also keep their fists closed. So opening that fist is also not a very convenient way to capture the palm print. Whereas fingerprint is a little bit more because you can open one thumb and capture the fingerprint. So these are some of the limitations of the different biometric modalities, and that's why we decided to use fingerprint. I mean, fingerprint has its own problems. Babies are sucking their fingerprints or thumbs, and so there's a wet, there's a dry, dirty, and so on. But at least it's a small surface area, and the cost of a fingerprint reader is much lower than other modalities. So when we started on this project, there were always some concerns. Oh, fingerprints are not well formed until 2 years of age. But this image illustrates that fingerprints are visible at the time of birth. So we are showing the fingerprints at 1 week old, 2 weeks old. It's not the same child, 4 weeks old, 6 weeks old, and 12 weeks old. So the quality of the fingerprint is improving over time. But the fact is that the fingerprints are formed as the child is born. The challenge is to capture a good quality image of this child's fingerprint so that it can be matched to subsequent acquisitions. So these are some of the challenges which have to be taken care of both at the hardware reader level and at the matcher level. Distortion, because the child's finger is soft, the skin is soft, and then placement of the finger against the fingerprint reader makes it distorted. It could be dry, moist. The time gap introduces some distortion, motion blur, and so on. So in order to capture and especially address the small ridge spacings, we designed our own 1900 PPI fingerprint reader. Commercial fingerprint readers are 500 PPI, so they are not adequate to resolve the neighboring ridges. We also wanted to make sure it's fast capture and then manual control for the person taking the infant fingerprints. The requirements in the software for the fingerprint matcher should be robust to motion blur, take care of noise and distortion, and be able to match with the sufficient time gap. So we designed this fingerprint reader. My PhD student designed it. As I mentioned, it's open source. You can download it. It costs about $85. All the components except the casing is available on website like Amazon. And it takes about 2 years for somebody who knows just basic electronics to put it together. So I want to show you the difference between the 500 PPI and 1900 PPI. It's the image of the same infant. And the left side, you see the 500 PPI, and the right side, you see the 1900 PPI. So you see the clarity of ridges and the ability to find the minutiae points in a higher resolution fingerprint reader. This is our whole pipeline. We designed our fingerprint reader, so there is a lip there, so the baby's thumb could be just directly put there rather than putting it at the top of the platen. The Bluetooth connection from the reader to the mobile phone allows us to capture the fingerprint. We do some transformation related to the age. If the first acquisition was at the age of 1 month, and the second one was at the age of 4 months, there's a time gap, and we try to do the correction in terms of the growth of the finger. We enhance the image, and then we have a database against which we do the search. So in terms of matching, we have to match a number of different matching algorithms based on different principles in order to get some reasonable accuracy. So I want to show you how the correction for aging on the left side, the leftmost image is without the aging correction. The second image is correction with aging. And you can see the overlap between the ridges is much better. It improves the matching accuracy. And then we also showed the enhancement, which we do. So the third image in this panel is blurred image, and the right image in the panel is the enhanced image. As most commercial fingerprint readers are 500 PPI, the matchers are also based on 500 PPI, but we want to utilize the 1900 PPI image. So we designed a new minutia extractor for these high resolution images, and that show better correspondence and fewer minutia points. So this is the accuracy which we get after the lapse of, so the child is enrolled between the ages of 2 to 3 months. After a lapse of 3 months from the enrollment, we have an accuracy of 95%. This is a combination of two thumbprints. After 9 months, 90%, and after 12 months, 85%. So this definitely needs to be improved further, but this is our solution for the end-to-end system. So to path forward, infant ID is a very difficult problem. It is similar to the latent or partial fingerprint matching in forensics. One of the challenges in order to continue research and development is the lack of any kind of infant fingerprint database. And unless we have such a database available, which is available to researchers and possibly vendors, we cannot build a robust algorithm. We need advances in both sensor design and robust matching method. And I have showed you the design which we came up with and which is available. And so I know some companies and other research labs have adopted that. The most important thing is the training of the field staff. If you do not train, and this applies to any civil ID system which uses biometrics. And there should be some incentive to the vendors. I think that the number of agencies who are interested in infant ID, but there's no incentive to the vendors. Most of the vendors go after the large civil ID market rather than the infant biometrics market. And the reason most of you may have heard of the India's Aadhaar program, which has enrolled about 1.3 billion Indian residents, but it starts at the age of 5. It starts enrolling children at the age of 5. And in a country like India, 25 million babies are born every year. So that means at any given time, there's always a backlog of a large number of infants who need to be, the biometric needs to be captured. So with that, I will stop, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Jain. We are going to take questions for you at the end. I'm actually impressed with the progress that you've been able to make. 85% is not bad, especially in the context of a multi-evidence authentication. Actually, I would like to ask the operator to do things. One is put up a poll, very quick one. And then the second is we have a request from the community voices from a head of the identity authority in Ghana. So maybe we'll bring one community voice and then we will continue with the final presentation from Simprints. Okay, so now we have a question. What is your level of concern about the capturing of fingerprints of infants and children? Quel est votre degré de préoccupation à propos de la capture des saisies des empreintes digitales des nourrissons et des enfants? Please vote. Okay. So the numbers are heading towards high concern. It's definitely okay. I think we got enough votes to give us a general idea where the trend is. Operator, could you put up show the result? Okay, for the benefit of those who are not watching live and it's on YouTube, 46% said they have high concern, 33% said they have some concern, and then 21% said no concern. Therefore, definitely there is either some or significant concern. The majority of you think that it is very concerning, the capture of fingerprint of children. We will come back to that topic at the end to see what kind of concern that might be. Okay, can we bring in? Yes, okay, here's a summary of that slide for the benefit of those watching in replay. Can we ask Professor Atafua to join us, or have we lost the connection? Operator? Yes, Professor Atafua, you are on the panel, as I can see. Can you turn on your video? Sorry, Alexandra, we'll be back with you in a second. We do have Professor Atafua from Ghana. Yes, could you please turn on your video or your audio as well? Okay, apologies for this technical difficulty. Why don't we just proceed with Alexandra, and then we'll come back to Professor Atafua afterwards. Okay, Alexandra from Simprints, thank you for being with us.
Hi, everyone. Let me quickly share my screen. Oh, I see that someone is already putting, can I share my screen, if that's okay? Fantastic. Share, all right. All right. Is everything okay with my screen? Can you confirm?
Yes, your screen is correct.
Perfect, thank you very much. All right, hi everyone. My name is Alexandra Grigore and I'm the Chief Product Officer of Simprints. Before I dive into our experience with child biometrics, I just wanted to make a quick introduction of the organization that I represent, Simprints. So Simprints is a non-profit organization based in Cambridge, UK, and our mission is to transform the way the world fights poverty. And we are doing this by building technology with the aim to increase transparency and effectiveness in global development, making sure that every vaccine, every dollar, and every public good reaches the people who need them most. So in the past 6 years, we have deployed our biometric systems in development programs in 14 low and middle income countries, reaching over 1 million people, primarily in healthcare, but also in education and financial inclusion. So let me start with a problem that I think birth identity, but more specifically using child biometrics can solve. And I think we heard from Mr. Cornelius from UNICEF earlier before what a challenge that is. So in particular for vaccination. So global vaccination coverage, which is the proportion of the world's children who receive recommended vaccines remains stagnant over the past few years. So in 2018, an estimated 20 million infants worldwide were not reached with routine immunization services, such as the 3 DTP vaccine doses. Additionally, in order to know and understand this coverage, we need to know who got the vaccine and who didn't. And often there are massive gaps between the administrative data and the WHO surveys, such as in Chad, where this gap is over 50%. So having a biometric proof of every vaccine dose will reduce this gap and increase our chances of reaching everywhere. So there are several use cases where biometrics can have a big impact, and I think in this panel we heard them. There are many. And I will focus mostly in this presentation on immunizations, but also nutritional interventions for children under 5 can benefit from the technology, and also general health monitoring for this category of the population, which is the most vulnerable population group, the children under 5. So as we already heard before, using biometrics for under 5 children is challenging. Because of this, we have partnered with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and NEC, the technology provider, to explore both technical feasibility, but also the operational aspects of using biometrics for vaccinations. And we're actually building on the fantastic work that Professor Jain has done. So I would like to express my gratitude for his research and also for his guidance in the early days of Simprints. So in this project, so far, we have collected fingerprints from 100,000 children between 1 and 5 in Tanzania, where the users were government healthcare workers. So this was not a research project. This was actually part of a standard service delivery with an added research component. So we wanted to see if government healthcare workers can actually collect fingerprints from children. And we started at 1 because the target population of that health intervention was from 1. So we didn't actually go down to 0 for this particular project. However, we think that if we can first tackle 1 to 5 and make this a commercial success, then it will be much easier for us to build on those learnings to develop 0 to 1, which is a bit more challenging. In the same time, in Bangladesh, we just finished the first round of collections of fingerprint images from 5,000 children aged between 0 and 5. They're grouped in 10 cohorts of different age groups. And we will do 2 more collections split by 3 months in between. We're collecting 4 fingers and we're doing 3 impressions per each finger with a high resolution sensor as well. And we're working with NEC on the algorithm development. They have quite a lot of experience in latent fingerprint matchers development, so they will be helping us with that. And the JPG School of Public Health in Bangladesh, they're helping us with this collection, but also doing user acceptance surveys. They employed an ethnographer to conduct focus groups with parents and community member, and also doing user acceptance surveys. And we have the results of those as well. So the goal for us beyond developing the technology was to understand operational major implementation challenges when it comes to fingerprints for under 5s, analyzing the local context and also the perception of parents and community, and assess the real life feasibility beyond only the technical component. So before I dive into some practical considerations, I wanted to address some ethical considerations. So first of all, we at Simprints are always advocating towards the use of biometrics only if there is a clear need and it solves a real problem. And according to GDPR, the data protection regulation in Europe, any data collection needs to adhere to the principle of collecting only relevant and necessary data. And I know at ID for Africa as well, there has been a lot of advocacy around that. So assuming this is true, then I grouped the ethical considerations into 2 categories, related to the process of collecting the biometrics and then related to the use of the data. So regarding the process, some questions that need to be addressed before designing any intervention using biometrics are: is the benefit to the child clear? Of course, we are a company that works only in healthcare interventions or any other benefits. So we are not doing legal registration and so on. So everything that I'm talking here is really limited to the use of biometrics for a specific purpose. Is the biometric method acceptable in the community? And here we recommend planning for community sensitization before any collections. And this is critical. And to be honest, this is not only the case with children, this is also the case with adults, but with children is even more important because of, we heard in the poll as well, the ethical considerations and the risks and the concerns that the community might have with that. And community sensitization can be done at different levels, can be done with the government officials or with the leaders in the community, but we recommend doing it with participants from the communities themselves where the collection will happen. Another question is around the users, and if the users who are going to do the registration, if they're really well respected and accepted in the community. If we want healthcare workers to do the registration as well, whether for a national ID system or for a CRVS or for anything else, we need to make sure that the healthcare workers are known to the community, and this is critical. And to be honest, I think this is also a benefit of using the healthcare force because usually they're known and accepted and respected in the community. And we've seen as well differences in the two projects that we were working. In the projects where we were using research assistants, actually having the community healthcare workers go with them in the community made a huge difference to the acceptance. And lastly, is the experience dignifying for all participants? Are there any risks of abuse for the users from the community members? And this can happen particularly if the community sensitization is not done properly. And of course, the technology needs to be easy and pleasant to use. We can't afford the technology breaking, the technology not working properly when you are dealing with both a vulnerable group of the population, but also with the healthcare force, which is already overworked and stressed. And it's a lot of pressure for them to fit in to reach certain targets of immunization every single day. So when it comes to ethical considerations regarding data, the first thing to address is establishing a lawful basis for the collection of the data. If consent is chosen as a lawful basis, it can also be legitimate interest or any other. But if consent is chosen, which is what we advocate for, we recommend that the parental consent is actually incorporated within the biometric capture workflow. So you have it whether you're using a mobile phone or a tablet or a computer or whatever you're using to have that consent capture in there, and also tracking the refusals so they can be monitored and addressed accordingly. We captured reasons as well for refusals, which can be things like religious concerns or the head of the family not being present, and hence maybe the mother cannot give the consent. And we can see how the refusals rate is correlated with the areas and also with the community sensitization efforts that have been done in that area. And then we can target sensitization in those areas where the refusal rates are higher, because it's likely some lack of understanding or knowledge around the use of the technology and the benefits, most importantly, the benefits of the technology. So extensive user training is also required on what consent actually means, because consent, we say consent over and over again, but actually in order to get, for example, a GDPR compliant consent, it needs to respect a couple of different things. The users needs to understand who is collecting the data, for how long is the data being kept, and also the right to be forgotten. So they need to understand that they can opt for their biometric data to be deleted at any time. And this is, I think, incredibly important and something that it requires effort from both the implementers of the technology, but for both from the creators of the technology to make that feasible at the technology level, which is not always that easy. Storing the data only as long as it is necessary to provide the services. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about interoperability and how this might be at odds with the ethical considerations. We recommend collecting a separate consent for research purposes as well. So if you're planning on using the data for any research, doing analysis, optimizing algorithms, to actually incorporate that in your consent forms so the beneficiaries are properly informed of what's happening with this data. And if there are any plans of sharing the data between different services, also getting parental consent for that specifically, for that specific service. Now, some practical aspects of data capture. Ideally, we would want to optimize the capture for both the children who are giving their fingerprints, for the users, the healthcare force, and also the algorithm. We need to make sure, as Professor Jain said, that we have a high accuracy. And the algorithm will often have different requirements than the children and the users. The algorithm can be more picky. So while the technology can always be improved, compromises will have to be made between accuracy and usability. And this is the case with any biometrics, but it's particularly more important when we're talking about children. So what are the needs of these? And I'm going to focus mostly on the children and the users. And I think Professor Jain talked a little bit about the algorithms and what we can do to optimize things there. But for children have small hands. They're not cooperative. They throw tantrums. They cry. It's not easy to capture any form of biometrics. And they need a device that looks friendly. We actually designed our device to have flashing lights that change colors, that attract their attention, so they become curious and then they become cooperative, and the experience becomes way more pleasant for both parties, as well as for their parents, who don't have to deal with their child crying. And they need to have the reassurance that it's not going to hurt. And in this case, because we collected vaccines, we collected biometrics in the time of COVID, the data collectors were using PPE, and also we were doing, they were disinfecting the fingers and the scanner after every single collection, and the child thinks that during after a disinfection happens, a vaccine will happen, which will in real life, and obviously they will be quite scared of the experience and hence less cooperative. So in this case, the users maybe played some funny videos on their phones or tablets, which made the child more cooperative, but obviously in a live scenario, this will be a bit harder. Real users. So this is the first time that we're aware of that a large cohort of community healthcare workers have collected fingerprints for children, and we learned a ton from this experience. We also had to do remote training because of COVID, and we optimized our methods of training someone to take a good quality fingerprints at a distance. And I think we will be improving this process for the follow-up collections as well, but the results so far are quite promising. And what matters to the users? They want a fast capture, they want an easy user interface, they want the lowest possible number of fingers. They would want one finger if possible. Obviously, the more finger you capture, the more you increase your accuracy, and also the number of captures. So we experimented with having them collect 3 different impressions per finger and less, and obviously less is better for them, but more is better for the algorithm.
Alexandra, can you wrap up?
Yes. So lastly, in terms of the cost-benefit analysis, thinking about collecting biometric data from children is not easy. Each modality comes with its own challenges, like Professor Jain also mentioned. We believe, though, that the benefits can outweigh the costs if the right resources and training are in place to ensure good capture quality and also doing proper community sensitization. And in order to decrease the risk of data misuse, maybe biometric data should not be kept beyond the intervention, but obviously this will be at odds with interoperability, and there will always be a tension between the two. And my final message is that we need better data sets collected in an ethical way for research to develop new standards and the technology for biometrics under 5. That's it. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexandra, for this tour de force on the use of fingerprints in a real-world implementation for vaccination. I'd like to now move into the final section of this, where we are going to bring in the questions and answers, bring in the panel and discuss with them through the community voices, their opinions about how you feel about the subject and the challenges you see in the field. But before we do that, I would like to ask the operator to put on the final poll of the day. Now you've seen all the presentations regarding the use of biometrics, regarding the use of fingerprints in real world scenarios. So the question we have for you: select the biggest challenge that biometrics must overcome to be viable in infant and child identification. En français, sélectionnez le plus grand défi que la biométrie doit surmonter afin d'être viable dans l'identification des nourrissons et des enfants. Okay, now we want to do this. Basically, let me give you some moment. Obviously, there are multiple challenges. Unfortunately, the Zoom platform does not allow us to ask you to rank the challenges. However, just select the number one challenge in your opinion. Is it exclusion cost, exclusion risk? Is it cost? Is it integration into existing systems and business processes? Is it data risks, social and cultural resistance? So what should biometrics, or what do biometrics need to overcome in order for them to become viable? Okay, since this is a complicated list of things, I will ask the operator to prepare a slide that we can put up with the results. Let's end the polling and put up the results, please. Okay. So basically, the highest risk, all of you believe, is 31%. The second highest is the data risk. You're worried about data protection and privacy. The third one is the integration into systems and business processes, and then the cost, and then finally social and cultural resistance. There's a lot of insight here to be gained, and here is the summary. Wonderful. Okay, so now can I ask the operator to please bring back the panelists, and I'm going to start going through the questions that have accumulated, but also if you are interested in being on the community voices, please raise your hand and we will bring you on. So let's bring out all the panelists, please, and we will start one by one. One question came from Khadijatu Tiam, which was in French, which was for me, which basically says, where are the sources of the definition of the identity, legal identity? There were two definitions. One is the official definition of the UN legal identity agenda that I cited. And I guess, Cornelius, this would exist on UN website. The definition that I read, UNICEF would have it, SDG website would have it. Okay.
Yes, we could have it, and I could try to paste it into the chat.
Okay, please do that. And the other definition, which is that I presented, is not an official definition, which is that legal identity is a traceable identity. That is ID for Africa's view of it, but it's an interpretation of that definition. Okay, so the next question we have is for Cornelius. Basically, do you have any statistics on the accompaniment that UNICEF has in African countries? This comes from Jinabu Kamara. Where can we find statistics on the participation and the accompaniment that UNICEF does in the African countries?
We have already pasted into the chat the reports that you were citing, and in that report that she can find that data. Right?
Okay. Okay, excellent. Excellent. Okay. Now another question for Mr. Williams. Any comment on the synergy between UN and World Bank in achieving the legal identity agenda?
That's a brilliant question, actually, because we're all development actors. So we are working with a colleague in ID4D, right? And there are some countries where we have come together. There is a strong collaboration. And there is also, we also actually, as the UN, sit on the group that regulates work on the ID4D. So yes, the collaboration is there, but it could be stronger. And the definition we have actually was negotiated, again, just like you said, Joseph, it was negotiated with the World Bank. Right, exactly. And it was actually an engaged and meaningful process that took a while to get there. Every word was negotiated. Okay, so let us bring in one person from the community voice. I see some hand raised. So bring in the community voice individual. In the meantime, we'll take a question from Brown Nambi. How is consent meaningful if biometric data capture is a requirement to gain access to public health services? So whoever wants to step up to this, I guess Alexandra would be one candidate because you were mentioning about consent. So how is consent meaningful if biometric data capture is a requirement to gain access to public health services?
So in this case, consent will not be the lawful basis for capturing biometrics. So if biometrics is required, then consent, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So another lawful basis, depending on the data protection regulations in the respective country, we need to be legitimate interest is another one that typically governments are using for this purpose. But in this case, I don't think consent will make a lot of sense if the service is made contingent on someone providing the biometrics.
Okay. Anybody else wants to comment on that? Or we can move on to the community voice. Okay, So Eva, please introduce yourself and state your purpose.
Good afternoon. Well, this event is greatly timed, so I appreciate you having me on, and thanks to all the panelists for the great content today. My name is Eva Mowbray. I'm the Director of Marketing for UK-based company IRISGuard. The reason I say great timing is obviously we're talking about children, we're talking about biometrics. So I just wanted to add something which may be useful. We worked with the Clarkson University on a study which looked at biometrics used with children, and in particular they focused on the stability, and we had content here about aging as well. So on the stability when using iris recognition in particular, and they actually looked at a group from age 4 to 11. They've just published it, and you'll be able to get a link to that in a chat, and I can repost that if that's useful of interest. So what they concluded is that it showed no evidence that children's irises age over time in that particular age group. And as here we debate the balance of the benefits and the risks related to the use of biometrics, particularly the ethical questions, which of course we recognize and stress that there must be robust safeguarding in place. There can be challenges when it comes to obtaining biometrics from the very young in the first place. So this study at least delivers a quite solid reassurance that there is stability when using iris as the biometric method. Whilst they focused on the age group 4 to 11, we've been working with the UNHCR and WFP for several years now, providing them with a secure system for identity management using no other ID, just the iris. Essentially, we enable them to get 100% accurate proof of life in real time, which is also linked to social protection of children, for example, involved in a Syrian crisis through our work with the CCF community, and that includes UNICEF as well.
Okay.
Out of the 5.6, I believe, million refugees registered using our technologies, about 600,000 of those are children as young as 12 months to 11 years of age. So whilst part of their process is to actually verify the identity on an annual basis to make sure they satisfy all the criteria, we only require a one-time enrollment.
Okay.
And
so is this data available? Is this data shareable and available?
Yes, it is. Yeah, this is actually data that we've calculated using the information they provided. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great point. The question is, Professor Jain, would you like to react? I see there was another related question which was raised and you said you would like to answer it. Would you care to answer? You're muted, Professor.
There was a question about the FBI certification for fingerprint readers for infants, and I think it's a bit premature right now because the number of vendors providing this capability is very few, and in any case, the data has to be recaptured after a year or so from newborn.
Right.
The second question is about the iris, use of iris.
There was biometrics can be difficult to obtain, and we work with UNHCR to provide iris recognition for the young as 12-month-old. Yeah, that's the one.
Yes. I'm not aware of the study. That I think there was a response to that question which said that they don't capture iris until 5 years of age and only photo are captured, but I'm not sure. 12 months poses a... So there's a question about iris capture, which is the throughput. How long will it take to capture the iris? To us, it seems like it's more like giving an eye exam to a child. Somebody has to hold the pupil, and child may be crying, the child may be sleeping, and that makes some challenges. In some countries, for example, in India, I know, probably in Africa also, they put some black suit around the eyes, and so it's not as user-friendly the failure to enroll rate may be higher for IRIS. But if they are successful, that's a very good, good lesson for us.
I think this is definitely transparency. We would like to see papers on the accuracy of all biometrics. There are still people who believe you can do palm prints, you can do footprints, you can do face, and clearly this is a subject in flux. I would like to note that several of the research groups that were working on artificial intelligence to try to capture patterns of the children's body who were with us 2.5 years ago have now disappeared. And so it seems that this is, as Professor Jain has indicated, this is definitely a serious problem, and a long-term research is needed. Okay, so let's continue. Daniel, if you would like to, I think Daniel Baschenheimer, if you'd like to add to that, please come up to the community voices. We can elevate you. In the meantime, I'd like to go back to Tulimeke. And Tulimeke, we need to ask a clarifying question. Basically, not all notifications seem to result in registration. Do we know what's the percentage of notifications that don't result in registration? And if that's the case, what happens? Are these children that just never made it, or just their parents disappeared, or what happens?
Thank you, Dr. Atik. From what we can see, it seems as if a notification, a birth would actually be notified, but the registration would happen as if there was no notification done. So we can still see that the registration is quite high, but what we're trying to sort out now on the system is to try and make sure that it's more difficult to register if the notification was done, but the reference, somehow the reference is not there. What we are seeing is, although we're not sure of the percentages because we're cleaning out the data now, what we are seeing is the registration eventually does take place. It's just that it doesn't take place using the actual notification, but there are certain things we can do in between there to actually make sure that the parent is aware that they need to use the notification in order to do the registration. I don't think they are disappearing. The figures seem to indicate that they're actually turning up.
Okay, so you think it's just an administrative hiccup that needs to be clarified? Because your issue with them upon notification, you issue a unique number, right?
Yes, there's a notification reference.
It's a notification reference which gets transformed into a unique ID number, ultimately, and linked to it.
Yes.
Okay, so basically, in principle, you should be able to track all the particulars and make sure that every notification results in registration. Annette, do you see that problem anywhere in the study of the 6 countries that you've looked at? Notification not resulting in registration?
Not something that I've particularly seen with the countries that we've looked at, but what we intend to do is to actually look around and see whether another country has picked that up and how they've actually managed to resolve it.
Yeah, Annette, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen that notification occurs, but the registration is then delayed, which I find natural in the current situation, because of course there's fear of showing up in the registration offices. But if you can say the real power is actually having this initial record that is electronically stored and it exists, it's linked to the identity of the mother or the file and the father in some cases, that can result in a legal registration later. So yes, we see it happening in a lot of the cases, except for example, in the Tanzanian case, which is a one-step model where they basically do the registration. They have merged the notification registration and people leave with the birth record. They have absolutely full registration from the beginning.
Okay, a question for you, Tulimeke, from the audience, from Bhaskar Mishra. Proportion of mothers that don't have any document. Do we know that?
The proportion, as in what the percentage would be?
Yeah, what's the percentage of mothers that don't have any document? You mentioned that there are some mothers that are giving birth who are completely undocumented.
Yeah, at the moment, I will not be able to tell a percentage. It's not something that we have worked out. But what is important in the way that the notification and registration system works is, even if a mother does not have a document, it is not a bar from notifying and registering the birth, because we are still going to use whatever particulars the parent gives us in order to register. It is not the best, because ideally you want it linked in such a way that it cannot be changed, but we will not send away a child because the parents do not have any documents.
Okay, understood. You're inclusive, nobody left behind, and you will regularize their situation as you enroll, as you register the birth, etc. I want to go to Dr. Aaron Ramodumo. Dr. Aaron, and this is a comment from ID for Africa, and we've been asked several times by the media and other organizations to review the document on the policy document that you've issued. We were very impressed by the thoroughness of the document, and especially the section, chapter 7, which proposes a set of principles. And I want to highlight this chapter to all the identity authorities in Africa. These are 10 principles that were put in place to ensure the responsible use and responsible deployment of this identity management, including the capture of fingerprints of infants, etc. How was this set arrived at? Was this arrived at in a consultative manner with civil society? Was it arrived at being inspired by international standards or principles that have been floating around recently? What was the process to arrive at these set of principles, which we endorse and we believe people should use as a model?
Thank you, Dr. Atik. South Africa is a constitutional democracy. And within our constitution, there are the Bill of Rights, which are linked to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So basically, we consider what is universally acceptable. And as a result, everything that we do should be in line with international practices, in line with our constitution, and also in a consultative manner with various stakeholders that are taking part in the infant identity management within South Africa. Thank you.
Okay, and you are now allowing general comments on this policy. When is the deadline to receive the final comments, and what's the next steps in presenting it to either the cabinet and then it goes to the parliament? Could you please walk us through the legal or the institutional regulatory framework that's coming?
Comments are allowed up until the 28th of February, 2021.
Okay.
And from there, we'll process every comment and finally take a step up. And we're hoping that by March 2022, that policy would have been approved. Obviously, it has to go through cabinet processes, through checks and balances. And if the cabinet is of the view that we need to look into something else, we would most definitely do that. And that is the process that we always consider. And we consider it to be appropriate and most relevant. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. There's a question from the audience from Mary Strode. Says, coming forward for registration could increase vulnerabilities for families of children of irregular migrants, potentially stateless parents or those of undermined nationality, as they may become more visible to immigration authorities and enforcement. How can they be protected as we roll out the legal identity agenda to cover all? With that, I would like Cornelius, I'd like Dr. Aaron, and maybe Tulimeke to comment on this.
Well, you definitely actually have pointed to Dr. Aaron, which we feel is a good model to show how you can protect refugees, because these people have made it very clear. What we have made clear, and then in some civil registration system, registration of a child actually is doesn't confer citizenship. So you know the two, actually, by blood or by location, okay, inside. Then the final point there actually is that there are guidelines and protection around the registration and the use of the data, right? And so again, there are some protection measures that can be put in place.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other comments about the fear of consequences if they come to register and then they feel that they're being targeted?
I think actually when usually when we're working with these groups, okay, I mean, my UNHCR colleagues are not here. We try to make sure that these protections are built in and that the community know that they would not be, that they are protected, right? And the firewalls between the different systems, okay, you just cannot hand over their data to law enforcement.
Right. I mean, Dr. Aaron, Home Affairs happens to run both sides, runs immigration and also runs the civil registration. Have you built firewalls between the two sides?
Look, we've got two core components within Home Affairs. One being the civic services, which deals primarily with civil registration, vital statistics, and the other part being the immigration services. The two joined by the IP. Whatever happens on the one side informs the other. It does not necessarily mean if one particular individual it's an irregular migrant, that person would be unfairly treated. There are processes in place as to how then do you deal with children born of, be it irregular migrants or illegal immigrants. Basically what we do as South Africa, it's every child born in the country has a legal right to a form of a document. Once you give notice of birth, we issue a birth certificate and we work with that family through the embassy of that country to say, one of your persons is in the country. Can you, as an embassy, facilitate the process of getting that person registered in your country of origin? But in the case of South Africans, those will most definitely go through the NPR processes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, one last community voice, and this is going to be, I think, in Portuguese. We welcome João Paulo Bernardo Montes. We have the interpreter with us. So could you please unmute yourself and state who you are and what you do?
Okay.
We're allowing you to share just one slide.
Ok. Espero que esteja a ser ouvido.
I hope that you're listening properly, and I think so, yes. Sim, estão ouvindo, sem problema.
Ok. Gostaria, antes de mais, de cumprimentar a todos os presentes e agradecer pela oportunidade que nos é dada para, em breves minutos, podermos compartilhar com vocês aquilo que o país está a fazer em termos de registro civil e identificação civil. O país tem enfrentado algumas dificuldades. De qualquer das formas, existe um processo de modernização da administração pública e com isso o país conseguiu então unificar os serviços de registro civil aos serviços de identificação civil e criminal. Com isto, o país está a modernizar para poder então acompanhar os passos que os outros países africanos e mundiais têm dado quanto ao processo de registro civil e identificação civil. Assim, podemos dizer que no período em que Angola inaugurou o seu primeiro bilhete de identidade eletrônico, até ao presente momento, Angola procedeu a um registro, ou melhor, a atribuição do bilhete de identidade
Angola has been able to
attribute
897.721 crianças dos 6 aos 11 anos de idade.
It's been able to register more than 897,000 children
mais de 22 milhões de cidadãos dos 12 aos 17 anos de idade.
And a lot of citizens
num processo de modernização e integração do sistema do bilhete de identidade com o bilhete com o registro civil, onde está agora na fase de testes da integração do número de identificação único do cidadão. Com isso, os cidadãos terão o número do bilhete logo que nascerem.
Will be able to have this number
a
and then share
será impressa na hora. Vamos imprimir a certidão de nascimento na hora e com isso terão então acesso também ao número único de identificação.
With this unique number of identification.
Nas conservatórias e haverá uma única assinatura.
So this will be approved by an authorization, an authority, and it will be only one number.
Estamos neste momento a preparar e consolidar a base.
Now we are preparing and consolidating
a base de dados do cidadão nacional,
que vai
integrar os serviços do Ministério da Justiça, os serviços do Ministério da Saúde,
Ministry of Justice,
da
Ministry of
Administração
Health,
do Território,
Ministry of Territories Administration,
que vão integrar o passaporte, os serviços do Ministério da Administração Pública, Trabalho e Segurança Social e que vão integrar também
Work and Social Security will be integrated as well.
O número de segurança social e todos mais.
The Social Security number will be integrated, etc.
Já estão inseridos no bilhete de identidade.
Those data are already in the ID ticket.
Exatamente. Mas gostaríamos então de finalizar, dizer que o país está a progredir com base nas recomendações das organizações das Nações Unidas e pelos esforços que o governo tem feito para então podermos acompanhar o ritmo de todos os outros países. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time. We'll be happy to share the Angola model for civil registration and integration with many other identities. With anybody, please send us an email and we'll be able to share.
Organizações. Por favor, mande o e-mail e vamos poder compartilhar com os outros.
Ok, muito obrigado. Muito bem.
Thank you.
Assim será feito.
Okay. We reached the end. Obviously, this was a very intense session. I want to thank all of the panelists for their valuable contributions and for actually sticking with us this long. It's clear that this is a topic of strong interest to the community and also to the development agenda, and we cannot afford to get it wrong. So legal identity starts at birth, and we got to get it right. So hopefully we will come back with some progress later in the year on the topic. So thank you so much. And we hope to see you in the gender session coming up on the 10th of March, where we address another important topic related to a segment of the population that could be disadvantaged.